I must abide with fear. Fear is inevitable. Fear is the adrenaline that courses through my body. I will feel my fear. I will sit with the feeling as long as it lasts. And as the crest goes past, I will remember the truth. When the fear is gone, it will come again, and I remain. Hi, I'm Nikki, and I know I usually talk about videos, but today I'm going to talk about fear and burnout. In the last video, I said, recovering from total burnout is complicated and definitely worth talking about. And I'm not one to leave an editorial promise unfulfilled. It just so happens that my burnout is directly related to fear. Yes, that includes all the related emotions like panic, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, etc. Because with all due respect to Frank Herbert, feeling fear is inevitable for most of us. But being immobilized by fear is not inevitable. At least not forever. So today, I'm going to talk about how overdosing on fear in all its various flavors burned me all the way out. Also, what I did about it and what I learned along the way. My pre-burnout era began before I was born. And as not normal as I am, my experience is incredibly common in this way. When the people who raised us and the people who raised them spent their whole lives navigating one trauma after another, is it any wonder that some of us were born scared? Generational trauma is real. Growing up neurodivergent can mean growing up with the looming fear that you'll be shoved onto a treadmill you know wasn't built for you way too early in life to adequately navigate the challenges that will definitely be thrown your way because, as someone who sticks out and gets caught flat-footed for not fitting in, you've already experienced firsthand that acceptance can be revoked without you knowing what you did wrong. Acceptance is conditional upon your performance and your compliance. At the same time, a lot of people in my generation grew up being told, often by boomers, that we could achieve our biggest ambitions if we just work hard enough. That's America. It's also bullshit. This attitude succeeded in getting a lot of people's hopes up unsustainably. And while some people possess the right combination of resources, personal health and capacity, combined with finances and community support, most people struggle just to make ends meet. The bootstrapping culture sets up a false expectation that anyone who doesn't fit into the neuronormative ideal just isn't trying hard enough. In other words, if you're struggling, it's your fault. Hyper-capitalistic expectations are the norm. So at this point, burnout is normal. And yeah, that's bad. Some of us are burned out before we even enter the workforce. Because so many of us were conditioned to operate in a state of perpetual stress, we might not notice when burnout gets unmanageable. I certainly didn't. It was mid-2016, just before Trump 1.0. Almost like my body knew to freak the f*** out before my brain did. When I had my first ever panic event, I didn't know it was going to happen ahead of time. I was just so used to ignoring my body signals and just pushing through whatever oncoming challenges that part of me assumed that I was supposed to do that forever. You know, don't stop or the fear will catch up to you. But there I was, shaking and sweating and so weak in my legs that I had to crawl to the bathroom. At work. My spouse brought me back home that day and tried to help, but it felt like the panic would not leave my body because it seemed to come out of nowhere. A part of me genuinely worried that something was critically wrong with me. It took 18 hours and an urgent care visit to learn that the only thing wrong was that my system was overloaded with stress. I eventually learned to manage the symptoms of the panic events. And as I learned to pay attention to my body's signals, I cultivated the ability to anticipate an oncoming problem. Uh-oh.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Clearly, fear isn't the only thing. I mean, we also have fascists and environmental collapse to worry about, but being afraid of how scary things could be is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of progress. Is it good? Hi. Editing Nikki here. Before I could finish editing this video, I experienced my first panic incident in 2 years. Did it happen because I dared to travel? Is it perimenopause? Compounding existential anxiety? Who knows? Bodies are glorious, complicated machines, and I am grateful for everything my body has gotten me through thus far in life. Here's the thing. I always knew that the next attack or whatever was inevitable because one, we live in anxious times, and despite my best efforts, two, panic can escalate in my body quickly. But I genuinely think it took 2 whole years to experience another incident because I stopped dreading them and accepted that they'd happen sometimes. And that's my point about fear. It's not possible to completely avoid it. The point is to learn to manage the stimuli coming in with the equipment you have. I'm only an expert on my specific situation, but I figure if someone like me can better learn to manage the fear coursing through my body, there's hope for everyone. Just remember, learning to understand and manage your body signals is just the first step. It's important, but it's just the first step. I had to make some major changes in order to create the right conditions for growth. These were deep internal changes that were difficult to achieve. Since college, I had been taking medication for chronic depression and anxiety. And while it's true that in some ways anxiety and depression are hardwired into my body, my grandmother's nervous breakdown decades before I was born can attest to that. I'm not inherently anxious. No one is inherently anxious and depressed. I know now that the anxiety and depression I experience are largely symptoms of being divergent among systems that thrive on normativity. My medications actually haven't changed a whole lot since that time, just my relationship to them. I can tell you from personal experience that there was a huge difference between using medication to avoid uncomfortable feelings so I could keep powering through, and using medication as a tool to manage debilitating symptoms that might otherwise prevent me from addressing the root cause. But for the first 10 or 15 years after that initial diagnosis, I wore depression and anxiety like identities. I knew deep down that I didn't want to be gripped by fear and sadness all the time, so getting medical confirmation that something was wrong was a relief. But something wasn't wrong with me. What was wrong was the belief that we should all be able to operate as cogs in a machine that ultimately serves to keep us broken. In some ways, neurodivergent people, especially those of us with sensitive systems, are like canaries in the coal mine. Yes, our bodies will give in to the harsh conditions first, like a canary, but the coal mines were bad for every single body, even the miners, especially the miners. And no, I didn't work in a coal mine, but I was burned out at work for years and I kept going because I was terrified not to have a stable income. Total burnout let me see just how much I was paying for that stable life. And in that way, total burnout presented some of the biggest challenges and opportunities of my life. In order to make forward progress in my life, I had to change not just what I was expecting myself to do, but also why. And what that needed to look like for me took a lot of time to work out for myself. Sometimes it's like that when you're working against self-criticism that's been bolstered by a whole lot of cultural reinforcement. Have you ever gotten a piece of advice that was so relevant, that hit the core of your truth so hard that you couldn't do anything about it right away? Years ago, I had a friend look me in the eyes and say, if you treated me the way you treat yourself, I wouldn't want to be friends with you. That's the kind of precision strike you don't forget. Unfortunately, a lot of my frameworks for understanding the world at that time were based on the assumption that I was inherently flawed. And after all, why would I be nicer to someone who didn't deserve it? Constant negative messaging terrified me into compliance. It took a decade before I was able to loosen the grip those ingrained messages had on me. And once I actually accepted that I didn't deserve all that negativity, it took another decade to get to the point where I genuinely wanted to be friends with me. In other words, it took 20 actual years before I could fully act on the truth of what my friend was saying. I hope it does not ultimately take 2 decades for you to make whatever changes would help to make a healthier, more fulfilling life for you and those around you. But however long it takes, please remember to be patient. Change is hard because it takes time for our bodies to get used to changes, even good ones, especially good ones, because it's the unknown. As I was recovering from skill regression, there was a period in my life where my brain would freeze for 15, 20 seconds at a time, completely stuck in the fear of making the wrong decision in a conversation. And as a former promo producer, I know that 15 to 20 seconds of real human time is a lot. If I started a sentence and then I'm not going to make you wait 20 actual seconds. You can already tell it's long enough to be awkward as hell. But By treating myself with patience and care, and by looking at my own difficulties with sympathy and curiosity, I was slowly able to make a new kind of progress. All those intentional changes were seeds I was sowing, and when the sprouts started to peek out from the ashes of that experience, it was delightful to see. That experience also inspired the embroidery piece for this video, by the way. I made a short explaining the piece, link in the description, or subscribe and hope the algorithm shows it to you eventually. Anyway, healing is uncomfortable as hell, but it's worth it in the long run for the long run. And yeah, right now, that phrase feels so loaded. I don't know what the long run looks like, but I do know that I, for one, want as many divergent people in it as possible. If you don't fit into the norm, the world needs you now more than ever. Even if you don't feel like you fit in, especially if you don't feel like you fit in, you belong. Being shaped by the knowledge that you're different can feel isolating. For people who have experienced repeated rejection, finding belonging can be a fraught process. And this can be especially isolating at a time when people all over are looking to build community and to strengthen bonds. Being vulnerable with other humans can feel incredibly risky, which I say with full body experience. In my case, a core part of better living meant learning to manage RSD. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a condition that a person can develop after repeatedly experiencing rejection or perceived rejection over a prolonged period. I've typically heard it discussed in reference to neurodivergence because people who present contrary to neuronormative standards often face rejection. I was the harshest critic I could imagine because deep down, I was always trying to prepare myself for the worst case scenario. If I pre-rejected myself, others couldn't surprise me with rejection. But then I stopped pre-rejecting myself. And you know what? I did get blindsided by rejection multiple times. Actually, having my worst fears realized paled in comparison to the damage I was doing to myself. In other words, it is better for me to be kinder to myself and surprised by an asshole than to treat myself like an asshole so that I'm never surprised by bad treatment. Some of the loudest voices right now want people who don't fit in to be afraid. Now, I can't just tell you not to be worried or that the fear is all in your head because the threats to our safety are real. And depending on your relative lack of privilege, the situation only gets scarier and scarier. But in a strange way, knowing that the assholes want us scared actually makes me more determined to bravely persevere. So, whoever you are, may you find wild and wonderful growth in the ashes of your burnout. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to talk to me about video editing or embroidery or burnout or whatever, send me an email at nikkinows.videos.com. That's NIKIKNOWS videos.com. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you stuck around this long, thank you so much. I know this one was heavy, so I appreciate your patience. Rest assured, the next video will be a blast. I've been wanting to do this one since before I was making videos for my own channel, so it's gonna be a good one. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Fear is inevitable. Let's go back up and I'll remember this time to not do it so whispery. Editing Nikki will appreciate that. This one's for you, Nikki. This one's for you, me.
This one's for you, me.
This one's for you, me.